What is home and how we address that issue. In 2013, it's difficult to pin down one simple idea of home and how that word relates to memory, art, history, and social justice. As I work on a new manuscript about those subjects, I find myself reflecting on how, when I was growing up in Karachi, Pakistan, I had no idea what the world would be around me. I did not know that I would have spent almost half my life right here in Houston, Texas, that I would be raising a bicultural, binational child, or that I would be writing, creating art, and community. My parents moved from India to Pakistan, and at that time, it was all one country. Pakistan was formed in 1947. There was a new border carved, and they moved. Their families moved. I was born in Karachi, Pakistan, and there I attended a British school where we studied all subjects in just English, no indigenous languages, barely any Urdu, the language that my family used. It was only later, much later, after reading textbooks that were passed down, history that was taught to us from British textbooks, it was only later that I learned to challenge mainstream textbooks and form ideas for myself, create community, work on creating art productions through which we could share our multiple truths. In the meantime, of course, I didn't know this growing up in Karachi. I didn't even know that a city such as Brownsville, Texas even existed. My husband was born in Brownsville, Texas, and he was growing up along the US-Mexico border. At that time, he and his siblings could not speak Spanish, were not allowed to speak Spanish in public schools. He grew up without much fluency in Spanish, a language that is claimed by the US-Mexico border, one that his family knows is theirs. They call themselves Chicano, Chicana, Transborder, which is something that all of us are today. Of course, if we think about it, we cannot today have the time to talk about the world as it is framed by today's geopolitical borders. We cannot talk about the indigenous languages, the indigenous lands and cultures that have been lost. We will stay with just today, and I will say that in some senses, I'm glad that some things have changed since my husband and I were growing up. Today, assimilation is no longer pushed. Personal narratives are appreciated, as you have seen today from all of today's stories. And there is a growing scientific research to prove that children's brains develop much faster if they are exposed to more languages at an early age. Together, my husband and I are raising a 9-year-old Chicana Pakistani born right here in Houston, Texas. She is fluent in 2 languages, Spanish and English, has comprehension in a third, Urdu. One of the first things I did when she was born was to get her a passport. And when she was 8 months old, she took a trip with us. And since then, she has made that 24, sometimes 36-hour journey many, many times over. And I'm now in the process of getting her dual citizenship, just as I have. This past summer, we were in Karachi again, and I asked her, would you like to live here sometime? She was like, sure, that would be cool. I would get to spend more time with Nani, and I'd make a lot more friends. I knew exactly what she was talking about. In Karachi, she gets to have special time with my mother. She adapts very quickly to the different schedule, breakfast at 10, lunch at 2, dinner at 9, and a spate of guests rolling in through our house at all different hours for meals, drinks, tea, whatever happens to be served at that time. But she lacks same-age companionship. That is something she has here in Houston, which she has made through the public school that she attends. But every morning when she reports to school, she is greeted with not 1, but 2 pledges of allegiance that are broadcast over the school intercom system. Often, she is asked by a classmate to put her hand on her heart. When I hear these stories from her, I am struck by how much has changed since September 11th, 2001. I remember how at that time I was teaching in a Houston public school. And in those days, students did not have to say the pledge if they didn't wish to. No Texas pledge was broadcast. And students were not monitoring each other on patriotism. Of course, when I was growing up in Karachi, we had to learn the national anthem also, but a lot of us joked about it, especially since the lyrics were in Farsi, Persian, which we couldn't understand anyway. But there, nationalism is on the rise, just as it is right here in the US and around the world. There is more fear, there is global violence, war, and nations are building walls to protect from each other. US against Mexico, India against Bangladesh, Israel against Palestine, just to name a few. Nowadays, I don't teach in the classroom that often. Mostly, I learn from my daughter. So when preparing for today's talk, I was chatting with her and I asked her, would you have liked it if I'd married someone from the same country as myself? And she said, no. That would be boring. So I asked her to explain a little bit more. And she said, well, I like coming from, having different histories. I like having more homes. I like being able to travel and learn about the world. And then she looked at me in a very matter-of-fact way and said, besides, Ammi, you're not from one country either. Your parents were born in India. And she knows that when I was a child, my mother took me across the border many times to visit my family's old homes, to meet family on the other side. What would the world look like today if we all together, right here, beginning in this room, pledged allegiance to ending international poverty or providing equal education to all, regardless of national borders? What if we weren't thinking about me, my country, my neighborhood, my city first? And we remembered our roots before these new, very new, geopolitical borders were carved, before we had to get passports to cross. And ultimately, what does the question of one home or a single allegiance have to do with social justice, art, and memory? The idea of one home is an old idea. Can you imagine how boring Dorothy's life would have been if she'd never gone to Oz? But somehow, in all of us, there is that yearning for that special place, home, under the gulmohar tree where my siblings, cousins, and I sat, waiting for my father to pull up in the driveway in his Mazda after a morning of seeing patients. And then we'd all get summoned into the dining room, buried deep in the recesses of my old house, of our old house, and there, far from the city sounds of bus horns blaring, pa-pa-ra-pa-ra, or the street vendor calling for recycled papers, Raddiya, or my grandmother scolding her maid, Ami tumse kaha tha na, and her voice floats down from her balcony down to our back courtyard. Many of these sounds are still in Karachi. Our house has been torn down. My grandmother has long since passed away. What is home? Can anyone truly answer that question of home, a romantic myth that some have let go of, yet some of us hold on to? As artists, perhaps we have to hold on to home, because home represents memory, memory shapes our art, and memory and home is our way of revisiting our history, re-examining so we can find truth for ourselves. On one such journey, on one such quest to find truth, I spent some time in Bangladesh this past summer. Bangladesh was once part of Pakistan. I did not learn about Bangladesh in my history textbooks. I did not learn about Operation Searchlight, March 1971, which was launched by the Pakistani army that landed in Dhaka and arrested and killed hundreds and thousands of Bengali activists, intellectuals. That war went on for 8 months, many more atrocities, rapes, killings, deaths, and there was silence in Pakistan, and only a few brave souls, artists, poets, activists, had the courage to speak out. That project has become, the research that I began there has become part of a larger project that I'm working on called Borderlines. Borderlines makes connections between what has been happening in South Asia and the history to connections right here in Houston, to neighborhoods such as near Northside, Gulfton, the US-Mexico border, to pull out the stories, to share them, to ask questions like, who does this story belong to? Who has the right to tell this story? And what is the right layer? There are so many layers to each story we find, and so many amazing artists that I'm working with are pulling out these stories. Jimmy Castillo, Autumn Night, Robert Pruitt, Habir Sandhu, Monica Villarreal, Oscar Sonnen, Jinwen Perez-Verti, Eric Hester have all continue to contribute as our artists from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and from the US-Pakistan border. And we will be sharing this with all of you. All that we are learning, we share with you over the coming 2 years, actually. As artists, we are the conscience of society. If we let our memory lapse, there is no history, there is no passion, there is no truth. It's urgent that we share the truths about the world around us, not as messages, but as responses to the pain and joy we experience around us in the world we live. Many have blazed the path before us: Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Patti Smith, Mel Chin, Arundhati Roy, just to name a few, very few. And now, more than ever, it is urgent for us to experience more of the globe than one single place, so no one location is viewed as superior to another. Perhaps further down the road, my daughter will create art to capture her experience of being in Karachi in December 2007 when Benazir Bhutto was assassinated in Rawalpindi, 800 miles away. And she will remember how the city and the country was burning and people died, and how we had to spend the night at my friend Salma's house. And we had to wait for the lull of morning prayer before we could be whisked to my parents' house just a few miles away. Why is it important that my daughter, at age 9, remember the name Benazir Bhutto? Or be with me when I go to cast one of my first votes at J.P. Henderson Elementary on Dismuke Street in Houston, Texas? So she can ask questions like, why are there no women presidents in this country? Why are all the streets named after men? And who is that woman who climbs under the bridge under I-45? And where is she today, now that her shopping cart is gone? She could not ask these questions if she did not have multiple realities. The path that my family and I have chosen is not always easy. Many of you who are choosing this path know what I'm talking about. There's a high financial cost. Those journeys are our investment, our college fund investment, so she learns about more than just right here. And there are bigger losses. I was in Houston when my father passed away. It took me 2 days to get back. It took my daughter and me 2 days to get back to Karachi, during which time the burial had already taken place. And we were in Karachi last summer when someone close to us was diagnosed with a form of cancer, and we had to scramble to get back in time for surgery. Being in the middle means I'm constantly comparing spaces. When people mention poverty, I say, where? When there's talk of education or women's rights, I'm wondering about the population under discussion. And ultimately, I do know that if more people had families living in Sarajevo, Addis Ababa, Dhaka, Bangkok, or Karachi, we would not condone drone attacks so easily. Sometimes when my daughter has conflicts with friends, I invite her to sit down and do what we are doing today, to listen and to share her truth. There is no guarantee that we will agree with everything that everyone says, but we will understand everyone's worlds better. For that, we have to be curious, empathetic, and we have to put judgment to one side. We are all complicated. Perhaps there would be less fighting, maybe even fewer wars and bombings. In response to a fast-changing world, we must all adapt fast. Make sure we listen, document our truths, and bring up the next generation to know as many worlds as possible. Thank you.